Okay, I've only got about 17, 18 pages here, and so, no, it's very short. So good afternoon. I'm David Tunick, President of the IFPDA, and I'm here to welcome you to this panel entitled Drawings and Prints, an Evolving Relationship. It's brought to you by the IFPDA and Master Drawings New York in association with the Master Drawings Foundation. Some of you may ask why, for the first time in the 36-year history of the print fair, the IFPDA has invited a group of drawings dealers to take a booth at the fair. Good question. I can tell you that for a very long time, the IFPDA board has debated whether to include drawings dealers in the IFPDA membership. That led in the past year to a larger conversation between Master Drawings New York, in the person of Chris Bishop sitting down at the end here, and the IFPDA. After all, there is nearly 100% crossover at museums. The works on paper and their curators are grouped in the same department, prints and drawings together. And the same for many dealers. There's considerable crossover. In this fair, historically, we've always shown a few drawings in the fair, but it's been limited. This year is different. The IFPDA is taking a deep exploratory dive, and I can tell you that the feedback from the curators in particular has been extremely positive and enthusiastic. The IFPDA is grateful to Christopher Bishop and the Master Drawings Association for having the courage to give it a go, investing in a large booth with 6 of its leading members. Chris himself, who heads the Master Drawings Association, Agnews, Lo Lipson, Johnny Yarker Limited, Murray Mosler, Stephen Ongpin, and Zeit Contemporary Art. Thank you all. The introductions of our scholarly, esteemed, and eminent panel, and I mean every one of those adjectives, will be brief so that we can move on to the main event. Our moderator is my friend Rena Hoisington, sitting here, currently the Senior Curator of Prints and Drawings at the National Gallery in Washington. Rena was the longtime head of prints, drawings, and photographs at the Baltimore Museum. She studied as an undergraduate at Penn and got her master's and doctorate at the Institute of Fine Arts, NYU. Kim Conity is the Stephen and Ann Ames Curator of Drawings and Prints at the Whitney Museum of American Art. She had previously served as a curator at the Rose Art Museum Brandeis and at MoMA here in New York. She's a graduate of Middlebury College and earned her master's at the Williams Clark Art Institute graduate program and her doctorate at the Institute of Fine Arts, NYU. Sometimes it takes a lick of the fingers. James Gabbarelli, sitting right here to my left, is the Prince Trust Associate Curator of Prints and Drawings at the Art Institute of Chicago, where he is responsible for the collection of European works on paper from the 15th to the 18th century. Jamie, Italian-born, attended Oxford as an undergraduate and got his MA at the Warburg Institute in London, his doctorate at Yale. He's currently working on an exhibition about the shared histories of drawing and printmaking. My former student, I'm proud to say, and friend Nadine Orenstein is the Drue Heinz Curator in charge of the Department of Drawings and Prints at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. She's one of the foremost scholars globally in 17th century Dutch and Flemish prints and drawings, particularly well known for her work on Bruegel, Bosch, Rembrandt, and Hercules Segers. The only art dealer on the panel, the aforementioned colleague and friend, Christopher Bishop. Chris specializes in drawings from the 16th through the early 20th century, and he has a gallery here in New York. This past year, he took over management of Master Drawings New York, which produces an annual Drawings Week with venues mostly in art galleries on the Upper East Side. Chris was an undergraduate at the University of Chicago and attended Yale in art history for graduate school. All of the curators on our panel have published and taught extensively and have mounted many stunning and edifying exhibitions. We'd be here the rest of the day if I were to enumerate them all. You can ask this stellar panel any question you like, as long as it's polite, during the Q&A at the end of the panel discussion. And now it's my pleasure and sincere delight to turn the mic over to the moderator, Rena Hoisington. Thank you, Rena.
Thank you, David. And I just want to say thank you to the IFPDA and Jenny Gibbs. Just congratulations on this spectacular fair. I also want to thank Michelle Stanek, who's for organizing this event, and I want to thank our all-star team of panelists, and I thank you all very much for coming on this beautiful Sunday afternoon. Saturday. Right. So the intersection of prints and drawings is really a vast, multifaceted, complicated subject. I think you could walk around to most of the booths at this fair and see graphic works that combine aspects of prints and drawings. And in fact, when we were brainstorming for this session, I loved that everyone came with different questions and different ideas. Are we talking about preparatory drawings for prints? Are we talking about printmaking as an extension of drawing? That is, rather than working on a sheet of paper, is an artist working on a matrix, a copper plate, a wood block, a lithographic stone? Are we talking about prints that translate, if not serve as facsimiles of drawings? And if so, are we talking about printmaking techniques that were specifically developed to replicate drawings like aquatint, which multiplied ink and wash drawings? Or are we talking about artists who intentionally combine aspects of printmaking and drawing in their work? As you can see, there are any number of paths into the subject. And of course, the possibilities have really expanded dramatically in recent decades with the digitization of collections worldwide and primary and secondary documents about graphics. So what we're offering you today is really a sampling of examples that cut across time and place and technique/media. Each of our panelists here have provided a handful of slides, which I'm going to be clicking back and forth between, hoping that we'll have an organic conversation, and then there will be time for Q&A at the end. But I hope that our approaches, which of course are shaped by our areas of expertise and the institutions we've worked at, our projects, and the collections of prints and drawings that we've been fortunate to spend time with, I hope that this will offer food for thought from our panel. We are going to start actually with Jamie Gabbarelli. There's a little preview of some slides. Jamie...
Can you go back to slides?
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Again, we're being organic. There we go. Thank you. Is that perfect? Yes. Jamie, as David mentioned, is in the process of organizing an exhibition at the Art Institute with Adina Adam, looking at the intersection of prints and drawings. So we thought it would be great to dive in with him and start talking about your project. So please, Jamie. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, so as Rena mentioned, I'm currently have been working for the past 2 years on this exhibition about this very topic of the intersection between drawing and printmaking. And it's a collaboration between the Art Institute and me and my colleague at the Getty Museum, Adina Adam. And we are coming at it with our particular expertise. I'm mostly a print scholar, and Adina is a drawing scholar, and we thought it would be the ideal project to collaborate on. And so when we approached this topic, we really wanted to try and find ways of navigating something that's so vast in a manageable way. And one of the ways we did that is to try and think of some categories or some of the main types of relationships that exist between drawing and printmaking. And obviously, Rena mentioned the most significant ones. So we decided to focus on drawing for print, drawings that copy prints, another enormous category. Every museum has hundreds of examples of drawn copies of prints, and nobody has really engaged with that material and explained why people do that. And printed imitations of drawings. I don't love the word facsimile, but we'll get to that. And then the hybrid section, which is we're thinking both materially and conceptually hybrids that sort of push the boundaries, blur the boundaries, and mix media. In each category, we're trying to sort of get to a very sort of precise vocabulary as well. So when we say preparatory drawings in the first section, we're really talking about the drawing that is used to transfer the design to the plate. And that's what we intend by preparatory drawings. Obviously, one of the reason I put this slide up on the screen is to show you this is a beautiful drawing by Pietro Testa that was formerly in the Devonshire collection. Now it's at the Art Institute. And it's a study for an etching by Pietro Testa, who's an amazing designer. And it's one of 3 drawings for this particular printed composition. And you can't really see it in the image, but the Madonna and Child are cut off from a previous sheet and silhouetted and then stuck on another sheet, and the composition is developed. And it's just to underscore this point that a print design takes as much as a painting to conceive, conceptualize, define. There's so much work that goes into it. So there's a lot of exploratory drawings, and that's a category of itself. It's sort of arriving at the design, but we're calling preparatory drawing, we're calling the last stage, just before you transfer the design. So that was one point. The following slide, I just wanted to give you an example of prints that imitate drawings. And again, the scholarship on this area is quite large in some pockets, but nobody, I think, has looked at the issue globally. It's been looked at in terms of particular schools, like the French prints or German approaches, but nobody has really looked at it from a European perspective. And even the vocabulary here, again, it's like, what's the category we're dealing with? Are we dealing with reproductions, which is such a sort of disparaging word nowadays? Facsimile is not really, I think, a category that is very useful in the pre-modern context. And I think the interpretation of prints like these that I'm showing you on the screen is retroactively influenced by the advent of photography and our understanding of what a reproduction is, which is completely absent from in the 18th century. So we're really interested in looking at what did people at the time think they were doing when they were making these prints that really, really strive to look like drawings. And why were they made, and what aspects were they interested in conveying, and what did they leave out, even more interestingly. And the last category that I wanted to talk about, the hybrids. So this is a monotype. So it's a print that exists in only one impression. It's by Giovanni Benedetto Castiglione, who is often credited with the invention of this medium, although we can't be sure of that. But he's the first person who makes a sustained body of this type of print. And it's a hybrid in our conception because one of the definitions of printmaking is that it's a multiple medium, and yet how do you deal with something that is produced with the sort of infrastructure of multiplicity, but is in fact a single individual object? And Castiglione is very interesting because he was also an etcher, and often the monotypes replicate designs that he did in other media. So some of the etchings are translated into monotypes. So again, there's this sort of appearance of spontaneity and freedom, but there's also a design process behind it that we often don't see. So this, I think, is one of the most interesting sections for me, because it brings up all these sort of questions of, again, definitions. How do we define a drawing? How do we define a multiple? And I was saying to Rina, interestingly, this print was at the Chatsworth sale in 1984, and it was the only print included in that very, very famous drawings auction, because, again, a lot of people consider monotypes drawings, and the Getty Museum, which is a drawings collection, has monotypes in its collection. So I think I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Yeah. We were talking about earlier how it's also incredible. It's the monotype, but it's a creation of atoms. So there's this linking of subject matter and style, which I know you're going to tease out when you're talking about the work. So this notion of hybrid, and I like the categories that you have, because, as print people, or print and drawings people, I should say, we tend to have very particular categories, but I like that you're thinking about new terminology, like Jennifer Roberts has, about thinking about the history of printmaking and different processes. So, and hybrid is one of those wonderful words that really enables you to think more broadly about this intersection of prints and drawings. And I'm going to switch now to Kim, because this was a work that Kim brought up. If you all haven't seen this absolutely beautiful Ruth Asawa exhibition at the Whitney that Kim co-organized with Edward Cobb at the Dominial, please go later today and see it. But I love that this was when we started talking about the artists who intentionally combine different techniques. These are the first things that you brought up because she's making a drawing with stamps, right? Would you please speak more about that? Yeah.
Okay, I think, is this working? Yes, great. That's right. I love that term, the sort of the simplicity of that term hybrid, because it, in one word, gets at the complexity of what these artists are dealing with here. The two works that I thought would be interesting to talk about in this case are these two different stamp works that Ruth Asawa made. The first on the left is one that she made with the laundry stamps when she was working while a student at Black Mountain College. It's very kind of experimental, but also communal environment for learning. And that she made these for her, for one of the courses that she was taking with Josef Albers on basic design. So the idea that the stamp, this kind of ready-made matrix, this everyday matrix, could be one that would be the foundation for drawing. And she's making very specific choices too. So you see the sort of sunburst motif, but even the B, the letter B in the stamp, is one that you can see she's almost understanding as a series of loops and looping them very purposefully together. So this, deceptively simple process that is very much about drawing. Same is true, I think, on the work on the right, and the other. This is a potato print. But a potato print where she's obviously carved into the potato, as one does with your elementary school children, here done to maybe more beautiful visual effect than what my kids could do, but nonetheless something that she very much thought of as a drawing. And I thought this was interesting when we were talking, actually, David, you brought this up at the beginning, of how many institutions now have combined departments of drawing and prints. And this happened fairly recently at the Whitney, but when I first started, I was overseeing the committee for drawings and the committee for prints, and I actually brought this Asawa potato print to the drawing committee, almost as a prompt for conversation around this topic. And you can go to the next slide, Rena. Thanks. The other two examples I've brought in, we're looking at one of those here, is David Hammond's. And Hammond's body prints, I think, are another great example of, these are more contemporary examples of artists who are very purposefully blurring boundaries, kind of creating these hybrids. Is it a print? Is it a drawing? If you aren't familiar with Hammond's body prints, these are works that the artist began making in the late 1960s. Very much thinking in a very purposeful way about the body, and specifically about the Black body and how it was being framed. You can imagine this is the era of civil rights. So by putting his own body as a body print, by greasing his body, and also subjects as well, he was working with other artists and other individuals, with margarine, with oil, laying on the paper to create the initial, basically the surface that would then absorb the pigment, and then sprinkling that with charcoal or colored pigments. So very much creating a print and drawing together, and with a very intentional purpose of doing so. And you can go to the next slide, thank you. Finally, I figured for the print fair, it's always good to talk about the Johns Savrin monotypes, which I think are a way, an example of an artist, again, who very purposefully blurred these boundaries and was always really blurring the boundaries between all mediums. And just, I'm sure many of you know this story well, so I'll be very brief. But for Johns, this whole story of the Savrin monotypes began, in fact, with a sculpture. His Savrin painted bronze, as it was called, sculpture that was itself about painting, because it was about the canister where he held his brushes. So kind of like the vessel for the artist, almost a self-portrait in a way. it became this Savarin can holding his paintbrushes became shortly thereafter. The original Savarin can is from 1960. In 1967, he makes his first prints based off of this, which involved an etching, so a hand-drawn etching, and a photo etching, sort of a photograph of this can. And then he returns yet again to ULAE, which is where he made those first photo etchings in 1977 to make what first was a poster for a Whitney exhibition that used the same motif. What you're seeing on the far left here is the first, or one of the first lithographs he made related to this poster, and the story goes on. In the middle, what you'll see is that when in printing the full edition of the lithographs, there was the paper changed along the way, and when he returned to the shop, he realized that they did not have the right amount of paper to make the full edition exactly how he wanted. So we came back. He decided to reuse those discarded, already printed lithographs to make monotypes. So then the one in the middle is him adding by kind of painting on plexiglass on top of the lithograph so he could see below it, making a series of monotypes from that. And on the right, you see, so the one in the middle is monotype and lithograph. The one on the far right is just monotype. So this is where he's just used where the lithograph is no longer the base. And this is something that, there's one quote that maybe I'll end with, which is something he talked about when he talked about the Savarin can itself. I think what interested me was that the coffee can was used to hold turpentine for brushes, the idea of one thing mixed with another for a purpose.
Thank you, Kim. I think this is a nice jumping off point, thinking about, well, printmaking is an extension of drawing, and also these formal and thematic variations that Johns is exploring through these impressions and so many more prints that he made. To move back in time to Nadine, sorry, going the other way, and I'm thinking about, we could start with the Altdorfer, or we could go to the Rembrandt. Do you want to go to the block? Yeah, okay.
So I had several associations when this topic was brought to me. This is a very special work at the Met in our collection. It is a woodblock that has a drawing by Peter Bruegel the Elder on it. And the only that was typical for when you were making a woodcut the Renaissance. The artist, Albrecht Dürer, Peter Bruegel, all of these artists would draw on the surface of the woodblock, and then as the block was cut, of course, the drawing would disappear. We are very lucky because, as you can see in the upper left, they started to cut the block, but then for some reason, we don't know why they stopped. And so the drawing has been preserved on the surface of the woodblock. I'm a Scorpio, and Scorpios love mysteries. And that's one of the things that I love about this topic is that I was saying earlier, it's like surprisingly, there are very few, there are a lot of drawings for prints, but there are very few documents that discuss what was the discussion between the draftsman, the designer, and the printmaker. And ask any printmaker here in this place, they will say that they have a lot of discussions with the artist who they're working with and about how it should look and how everything should be. And so, but for the Renaissance, we can only go by these little pieces and try to extract from them what we can about how these artists work together with the printmakers. What was interesting about this is the woodcut was stopped completely, and an engraving was made of the same exact scene. It's called The Dirty Bride. It's clearly a street theater scene where these people have like pots and pans on their heads as costumes, and then there's a guy holding sort of a teardrop shape vessel, which is where the money would go in, and then the print was made much like the year after Bruegel died, into an engraving. So was that sort of a commemoration of the artist? I don't know. Did someone keep this as a commemoration? Then the next one, the other thing that, no, go to the Altdorfer. Yes. So this is actually a tiny print by Albrecht Altdorfer, Landscape with Double Spruce. It's an early etching. And we did a whole exhibition right before the pandemic on the beginnings of etching in Northern Europe and the beginnings of this technique. And one of the things that etching really allowed was people who were not trained as engravers to make prints. And basically, they're drawing on the surface of the copper plate. And so that, to me, is another idea of drawing and making prints, because here they are. We have Altdorfer, who actually was an engraver. A lot of the earliest etchers were real professional printmakers, but it really opened the door to a lot of other people, like Peter Bruegel, to make their own prints, their own etchings, because they didn't have to have years of training to make an engraving. And then give me the next one. And then sort of one of the greatest of all time printmakers is Rembrandt van Rijn. And he, this is one of his greatest prints, the Three Crosses. It's called Christ crucified between two thieves. It's our impression, which is fabulous, first date, printed on vellum instead of on paper, and it has like all of the experimentation you want to see in a print by Rembrandt. But it's his first, it's a print only done in dry point, and dry point is one of these other techniques that really is like drawing on the surface of the copper plate, and you really feel like this is a drawing, except it allowed Rembrandt to make numerous impressions. It allowed him to ink the plate in experimental ways, which he wouldn't have done in a drawing. Maybe he would have added wash or something, but this is a way of taking, he could draw, but he could also have exactly the same composition and do it over and over again in many different forms. So that's what I have to say about that.
Thank you. No, and for those of you who've seen the first state on vellum, it has this glow to it. It's a really extraordinary object, and it's so rare. Nadine, as a segue to Chris, I wanted to come back to the idea of the survival rate, because it still blows my mind that you all have the block that Bruegel drew on, because there's so many drawings, information about this intersection of prints and drawings in the history of art that just haven't survived. And so we have to piece it together archaeologically, sometimes looking at things. So Chris, I know you wanted to talk about potentially unrealized projects, and how does that impact how we look at works of art and understand them? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So when I was putting together the booth, I was sort of interested in a lot of the same issues without necessarily talking to Jamie or others on the panel. But I thought I would talk about one of the most curious sort of examples on the booth itself, which is a set of sheets by Fra Stefano da Carpi of drawings after compositions by Guercino. And it's actually an amazing survival, because you have 4 compositions on 3 sheets each, and then you have 2 Madonnas drawn and together on 1 sheet, and I framed it all together. So you have sort of, I think, a total of 14 compositions represented. And it's an interesting example, because when I was thinking of putting together the booth, the obvious thing would be to have the drawing and the print side by side. And we have a couple examples in the booth of this. We have a Le Prince drawing with the De Marteau print after it. We have a Carlo Morato drawing with the Frezza engraving after it. We have a Gandolfi drawing with the etching after it. But there were other ways in which I was thinking about this, and of course those cases are hard to put together for dealers. Sometimes you might find the drawing, and you might go looking for the print. It might take you, in the case of the Murata that I had, it took me 2 years to find an example of that engraving that was coming up for auction. So I thought of expanding the field and talking about other examples. And the Da Carpi is sort of an example of this. You have a Capuchin monk who's traveling throughout northern Italy, over what must have been the course of years, collecting drawings of compositions made by Guercino, paintings and drawings, and in some cases engravings, and putting them onto these sheets in a way that suggests that they might have been for print. So the question becomes, is this sort of a personal inventory that he's doing? Is it part of his devotional work? Is he interested in the iconography of Guercino? And in particular, you have 3 scenes, 3 drawings after paintings by Guercino of of St. Francis receiving the stigmata, of which we only know 2 versions. So he knew 3 versions, and he puts all of those in. So to me, it's fascinating in the sense that I think what he's doing is a sort of early type of art history. And if we could look at the next slide, you see an example of his own painting at right, and you see that he's a very Guercinesque sort of painter. He's very influenced by Guercino. He's very involved with the Accademia Clementina in Bologna, which sort of carried on the legacy of Guercino. But on the left, you see a grisaille painting that he does in the convent when he goes back, which is really in the form of a print. So he creates these paintings on the wall, which are actually inscribed in the bottom as if they were print. It's more like trompe-l'oeil, where he's trying to sort of do a painting that looks like a print. So to me, it remains an open question. You have 5 of these sheets where there are originally 40. Was it meant for a biography of Guercino? Was it a personal object for him to have a sort of record of his travels? Was it an independent sort of print project that never happened? Or was there some kind of painting project that he was going to do a room of Guercino after Guercino paintings, maybe in the monastery? So this idea of bringing the encyclopedia of art into the monastery. To me, these are the most fascinating examples on the booth itself, are the ones where there's still an open question as to what was going on and why.
Thank you. Thank you. I think, thank you for all of our panelists. This was great. Again, just a sampling of some of the many projects that we're working on. But I think we'd like to open up the floor to questions. If anyone in the audience has some. I mean, I also have a couple of questions in mind, and I know David does. Look at that big smile.
I'm going to start us off and reserve the right to the first question. So one thing that's troubled me since I became involved with prints at 17, 18 years old, and always recognized them as original works of art, another medium like painting or sculpture, another means of expression, is why is it the general public, in fact, thinks of prints and sometimes drawings as poor second cousins? Fairly recently, MoMA, as all of you would know, and maybe most of you, MoMA has hung prints and drawings with paintings. And so that 99.9% of the general public will go in there and not draw a distinction between a painting, a draw, and isn't that great? They're regarded all as original works of art. And in fact, now the exhibition at the Met of Manet and Degas, same thing really. We had that at the National Gallery some years ago in the Cassatt exhibition, prints, drawings, paintings, all hung together, and of course up in Boston in the Goya exhibition. So my question to our panelists is, to what extent are you trying to urge your directors, I'd like to go down the line here, to do this on a permanent basis, and to what extent are you not doing that? We know the constraints, for example, of daylight. So, Jamie, you want to take that on first?
Sure. I don't know if I can sort of lobby my director to do anything that he doesn't want to do, but in a sense, I think in Chicago we're very lucky because we have galleries that allow for the exhibition of permanent collection prints and drawings on a regular basis. It's one of the museums that has, I think, the most space devoted to works on paper. We have about 200 works on paper on view at any time. And I think it's sort of a gift of the design of the galleries that allow the control of light and exposure. And so we do, as a rule, exhibit prints and drawings alongside paintings and as a regular part of our permanent collection display. But yes, I think that's one of the, I realize that's a rarity, and I know that when they were building the new building and Renzo Piano extension in Chicago, they really tried to ask for light regulation in the new space, and it was very limited, in fact. So we can't show half of the collection, i.e. modern and contemporary doesn't have the luxury that old masters do, thanks to the design.
Rena, what about at the National
Well, I was
Gallery?
just going to say, Jamie, how often do you do the rotations for the works on paper? Is it every 6 months? Or?
Every 6 months, and they're not all at the same time. So a rotation would happen every 4 to 6 weeks in some space in the museum.
Thank you. Yeah, so we have, it's actually funny talking about separation of prints and drawings. So the division of prints and drawings at the National Gallery is the largest curatorial division, and we actually have modern and contemporary prints and drawings is one department, and then we have Old Master and 19th century drawings. We have Old Master and 19th century prints. But we all work with prints and drawings, and as we've talked about today, there are so many intersections. But it's, for us, so we have dedicated galleries, the inner and outer tier galleries that are in the West Building on the ground floor, and those are the galleries where we've historically, from the opening of the building in the early 1940s, have rotated exhibitions of prints and drawings and also photographs. But and then we have done select installations in the East Building, and this is separate from special exhibitions. But even the integration of sort of cross-media is still relatively new for the National Gallery. When there was the fabulous Hubert Robert exhibition at the National Gallery that Yuriko Jackal worked on with Meg Griselli, they had drawings integrated in with the paintings, and that was almost a first, along with Degas and Cassatt. But in the long run, we're really trying to think about more possibilities for integrating media. So this is one of the long-term plans for the National Galleries to reinstall the West Building and really include more works on paper in the gallery. So I think that will be exciting. But in the meantime, there's a lot. Everything takes, planning reinstallations, as I think many of you know, Mary's laughing, it takes years, years on end, and especially at a large federal bureaucratic institution. But I'm hopeful moving forward that people will really be able to appreciate the cross-media nature
Thank you,
of our
Kim.
collections.
Tell us about the Whitney.
Sorry, I did it again. So I mentioned before that we used to have on the acquisition committee side a committee on drawings and a committee on prints. That has been brought together in the last few years. In terms of how we've installed in the building, we've always been integrated. And I'm also coming from by far the smallest institution of any of my fellow panelists here. So even within the curatorial department, we do not have divisions like that at all. There's me and a curatorial assistant and a curatorial fellow. And we're not even considered a department. So we work very closely with all of our colleagues across other specialist areas. And I would say the permanent collection galleries at the Whitney right now, the whole floor of the 7th floor and the whole 6th floor are permanent collection. You will find all mediums brought together in those galleries. And what we'll do sometimes in terms of the rotations, because it is kind of a nightmare when you integrate this beautiful installation, then you realize, oh, the paintings can stay up, the sculpture can stay there, but we have to take down this one drawing and then this one print. So we try to just think about that very carefully in advance. And often when we're planning a big installation for the collection, we will program out those 6-month rotations and what those works will be in advance so that it's kind of tucked in. The one other thing I would say, though, that we think about sometimes in special exhibitions, and I can bring my own experience to this, sometimes you do want to also allow people to have a more, a different kind of viewing environment to get into prints and drawings. And so for me, working on the exhibition of Edward Hopper's New York, for example, I did that purposely through the exhibition design to integrate, to be able to have big open views that had some natural light, to have paintings, but recognizing that I also wanted people to really spend time with the works on paper. And so we created special areas where that work would be shown. It's just you need to kind of readjust your eyes sometimes. So I see there's value in that also.
And Nadine, of course, it was, I think, under your predecessor, wasn't it, that the prints and the drawings came together under the same umbrella for the first time?
That's true. I was going to say that my director, Max Hollein, is the first person to advocate for mixing everything up. You know, think out of the box. That's what he wants. And I think that's great. I am one of 3 curators who are heading our Modern Wing, Tang Wing project, and that's because he wants works on paper integrated throughout the galleries. But of course, you know, we have to think about rotations, and the more you do that, the more you have to think about, oh well, this comes out and this goes in, and we don't want the works on paper to be like in the corner, because that's the easiest place to take things in and out. You have to have them worked in to the whole gallery. But I do feel that there are different publics for prints and drawings, like totally different groups of collectors, and maybe we can change that by mixing up the fairs, but I do think it's like very different people who are enthusiasts of these different media, and I do think that it's one thing mixing up drawings and prints, but then there are a lot of works that you would never show, and there are certain things that are prints, and they're interesting because they're prints and they relate to other prints, and I think you need works on paper galleries to show that, and it doesn't come out when you mix everything up. So that's what I do.
What about questions from anybody in the audience? Yes, right there. Yeah, hold on. We're gonna give you a mic.
Thank you very much.
A
and thank you for
statement coming up.
sponsoring this. A statement, a question, actually.
Okay.
I appreciate all that has been said, and I would like to suggest, since we are comparing different artists in the print or painting media, at this point, perhaps the next step would be to have, for example, Degas, Rodin, and others who did, and Picasso, who did both art in 2 dimensions and art in 3 dimensions, and compare those, Gauguin as well. All of those, I think, would be fascinating. And yes, it is true, you can't always mix them up. But for those of us who are in this other world, where we like to see the comparisons, little ballerina in 3 dimensions and 2 dimensions, that kind of thing, I think would be fascinating.
Yes, I think that the exhibition that a lot of us are still waiting for is of Picasso, where it could be done on a day-by-day basis, because he dated so many things. And so what was going on in a certain, I don't know, 3-8-month period, and show all the different things in prints, drawings, paintings, sculptures, cutouts, and so forth that were going on. I mean, in a sense, there wouldn't have been a Guernica painting without the great Minotaur Macchia print by Picasso. So, yes, a question there. Go ahead.
First of all, I have about 3 questions.
You may ask one, and then we'll see if there are others. Okay.
I'm in the financial world, so please bear with my questions. First of all, during the 36-year history of the fair, has the interest in print art increased, stayed about the same, or slightly declined? It's a bigger picture question. And second, I'm a layperson in the field, but from the expert's perspective, what do you think would be the distinctive sentiments and emotions that are expressed by print and not by drawings, and probably not by photography? And third, the values of these artwork, is it completely subjective? Thank you.
Chris, it's a market question, or at least 2 of them are. Do you want to take that on?
I'll answer it as best I can. I mean, I could talk a little bit about the experience I have in the booth, and it's interesting to show drawings in a print fair, because I think that the way that people look, the way people are used to looking, the way that people are trained to look, if they're collectors of prints or printmakers, may be slightly different than collectors of drawings or painters. So you do notice a different perspective from the 2 groups. But I would say that it's always interesting to hear the other side of things, and so I've learned a lot from that. I would say, to the first question, I would say that things have shifted. People are interested in different things than they were in the past, and this always happens. You know, there's an evolution, there's trends, there's fashion, and I don't know what to say to the third question. I would say that most everything is subjective, yes, but I would say that the rarity of a lot of these things, the importance of a lot of these things, the durability of a lot of these things is what determines value. And I think that that's consistent, and that from a dealer's perspective, it's something that that they understand very well, and it's something that they know. Otherwise they couldn't price things if they didn't understand these principles. So it's something we pay a lot of attention to, and I think we understand through the market, and we understand through our interactions with the market and with each other, and there's a great deal of consensus as to what things are worth.
Right. Of course, it's really a supply and demand, like almost any market. In the 1920s, certain French 18th century prints were worth as much as a very nice house. That has changed. And so there will always be change, and nobody really has a crystal ball. Even iconic artists, we have seen stars dim and stars brighten. Anybody else want to say anything? Rena.
I was actually going to ask David, just because you have such an incredible sense of the history of the print fair, just the content, if you will, of the booths, because originally it was really all old master 19th, early 20th century, correct? And now it's overwhelmingly contemporary with less and less earlier material. I mean, I would say that's been a gradual shift over time.
Yeah, I'm not sure that there was no contemporary at the very beginning. I mean, we, for example, were thought of primarily or almost completely as old master dealers. I've always sold Warhol, and I have one in the booth now, in a booth where we have things from the 15th century. So that has changed. The big change for us as an organization, the IFPDA, Internet Fine Print Dealers Association, the number of publishers that have come in who are selling their own product. I think it's exciting, and I think it's one of the reasons the fair looks so bright and so fresh and so good. Nonetheless, what did I count? Something like 7 old master dealers at a time when people say the old master market's going down. That's not true, particularly at the very top end. No problem in selling. Nadine, I could get you a lot of money for that Rembrandt on vellum, that first State 3 crosses, Any other questions out there? Yes, please.
Hi, thanks. You've touched a couple of times on expanding the collections, but also the collectors. I'm a poster collector, but Cuban posters, and so there's a lot of overlap with prints, silk screening, and posters. One of the things that I was struck by in the Drue discussion is how connected his focus was on local industry, and to me that's a response to patrons, and essentially that there's something of advertising in those early prints, including the earliest prints that were discussed that were used. My interpretation was for war bonds, and so what could be more consistent between the 1500s and now than war bonds. So what is the thought on integrating also posters into prints and drawings?
Well, we are having in our galleries in the spring an exhibition of posters, of turn-of-the-century American literary posters that have been given to the Met since I was an intern in the department in the 1980s or 90s by Leonard Lauder, and he has consistently been buying more of these beautiful, by interesting artists, very colorful, I mean, in a certain way, like the Cuban posters, and we're actually considering a collection of Cuban posters ourselves. And but I feel it's part of, the Met's print department has always had the idea that prints were not just the great masterpieces, but you had to buy all around the masterpieces. That was what William Ivins, our first curator, said to the trustees when he founded the department. And really, we have continued that way of thinking to this day. So you don't just buy the great Rembrandts, you buy them, but also you buy all the other kinds of prints around them. So we have one of the biggest collections of baseball cards outside of Cooperstown, and as well as great works by Degas and others.
Yeah, I want to say that in my youth, fresh out of college, I worked in the Metropolitan print department, and one of the things that amazed me, I was assigned to Drue the first year and Rembrandt the second year, but I discovered that the Met also has an incredible collection of cigar wrappers. And so cigar manufacturers and I guess graphic artists from all over the world would come in and want to see the cigar wrappers. So prints are not... Says cigar and tobacco pieces are among the hottest selling. That's because there's not so many cigarettes anymore. But as a cigar smoker, I could tell you there. Okay, we're going to go on to any other... did you have something else to say,
I also
Rena?
just want to add at the Met, we have Ali Rudnick's great show, Art for the Millions, which has some amazing WPA posters, both from the Met's collection and on loan in pristine condition, I know. But they're spectacular. If you see them, yeah, nodding. Yes, yeah, please see that as well.
Any other questions? If not, I have one more, and then unless you have something to say, we'll close it out. And that is that we read a lot about scientific discoveries, new imaging techniques that teach us new things about paintings, things that were covered up. What about with prints and drawings? Is there an intersection there? What discoveries have any of you made with conservators in your museums that you didn't? Jamie, you're nodding your head yes. You want to tell us, or?
Sure, I can try starting, but I think at least from my point of view, the collaboration with conservators is extremely important, and for my research and for our project. So actually, Getty and AIC conservators are involved in the publication and in the exhibition we're preparing. I think, in terms of imaging, I mean, often there's fewer layers to go through, but in the case of the Castiglione monotype, for example, we really were trying to figure out exactly what materials were used and what techniques. And so fabulous conservator Mary Broadway did a series of experiments with different materials and different, she read sort of the historic manuals and tried to recreate, how can we achieve this effect? And that kind of, focus on the material reality of it is very grounding, I find. And so we did similar experiments with counterproofs and counterproofing of red chalk drawings. And thankfully, we have historic red chalk in our collection, so we could do that. Again, sort of trying to get our hands on how these effects were achieved instead of sort of staying stuck in books. I think that was
Anyone else want to tell us about a discovery, Rena?
Well, no, I was going to say, Nadine, the work you did with Rachel Mastelish for the Renaissance of Etching, just breaking down the technique, and also, name just threw out of my head, our amazing Dutch colleague who...
there was a lot of research done for the Sager show by the team in Holland.
Right.
Ad Steinman is someone who's he wrote the book, literally wrote the book on printmaking techniques, history of printmaking techniques. And he really did a lot of research into how these prints were made, which look very mysterious and many layers. Actually, the thing I was going to bring up is Rick Johnson, who is a former professor of engineering at Cornell, has been doing a lot of work with his disciples on watermark and paper research and trying to match up papers that all came from the same batch of paper via their chain and lathe lines, and then from that you have the ability to say that a drawing by a Rembrandt pupil was done from the same stack of paper, so probably in the near vicinity of drawings by the master himself, or things like that. So they're still working on this. It's sort of a puzzle how to do it, but it's been a big project that's been going on. I've been helping him out a bit with that too.
Can I add one fun thing
Yes, Kim.
it's very short, I promise. With the Ruth Asawa exhibition, I worked very, very closely with our conservator, Clara Rojas Sebesta. She traveled with me. We saw most of the work together. And one particular work is a fish print, kind of playing on the traditional Jiataku process. And she was trying to understand some of the marks on the sheet and whether they were ones that she would want to try to minimize, or is this something we should clean? And she actually was doing DNA testing in that case, and it was fish juice, so it stayed. But it's often works in surprising ways, these works with our conservators.
Chris?
Yeah, I was going to say something along the same lines. I think there's a lot of room to sort of develop new techniques to capture sort of incising and to compare scale across things. So often these are the things I would love to be able to do, is to isolate the incised parts of the drawing, compare that directly to the print in scale to understand what stage of the preparatory. Is this the drawing that is the immediate predecessor, or is it some intermediary stage? There's an interesting DeVos sort of drawing on the stand where the print is quite different than the drawing, and yet it's in size and reddened on the back in red chalk. So it'd be nice to sort of be able to compare in exact scale to really understand what's going on. One of the things when I had my Leavens drawing and I was able to overlay the drawing onto the print and put it on a light table, that was a real aha moment, because it'll never be repeated, but it gave you the exact relationship, the exact deviations in a way that it was incredibly instructive.
Thank you all very much. Thank you all out there for coming on this beautiful day and sitting inside. Great job, Hannah. Thank you.